Welcome to Wealth Matters Podcast, Glenn. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you for having me on here.
Absolutely, sir. So, do you mind telling my investors what do you do?
Well, I somehow found myself in this weird little niche of selling mobile home parks, and somehow managed to make a career out of it. It was, something I reluctantly got into maybe 20 years ago. Well, I got into brokering 20 years ago, and I got into my first mobile home park maybe 17, 15, 16 years ago, and learned the business the hard way and continued brokering. And sooner or later, I realized that I was one of the few people that had some real experience in my little niche of people that I knew. So I started brokering these mobile home parks, and now I do it exclusively. And we have a national team now, and we sell mobile home parks and RV parks and campgrounds, but primarily our main business is mobile home parks.
That's awesome. So, can you tell me some of the advantages of owning a mobile home park versus single family home or multifamily apartment buildings?
Sure. So, I've actually owned all of those things,
That's awesome.
and, and tried them all. And I can tell you mobile home parks are one of the harder ones, especially if you buy, a park like I did where you had a lot of park-owned homes and
Right.
craft tenant and stuff. But when I used to own single-family homes, I thought that was a pretty easy business. It was,
Right.
find a house, buy the house, find a good tenant. She stays there, or he stays there, or they stay there for a year or two. And you up the rents the next time around. My problem was that is I couldn't make a living on it. It was not enough cash flow from the single-family homes
Exactly. It's hard to
without me
scale
having.
up.
It's hard to scale up, and I wasn't trying to buy 50 houses, when I was in my
No.
20s. So, I got out of that and started buying smaller apartment buildings and working for smaller apartment buildings. And, that took off pretty well. But I realized that the apartment buildings, there's just so little profit in them at the end of the day, and it's still a lot of exit value. And, there's profits to be made, but even, 10 years ago and, 15 years ago in Florida, the cap rates were still very obnoxious on
Right.
apartment.
Right.
And it was hard to make a buck. So that's why I eventually reluctantly bought a mobile home park, because it was giving me a 10% yield. Um,
Nice.
and I said, okay, I'll try this thing out. And one thing led to another. So, from an experience standpoint, I think mobile home parks are harder to run. But at the end of the day, you're going to probably make a little bit more money on them if you do it correctly and you learn the business and you get the park operating as a land lease community. Then the money's a whole lot easier to get in. Now you're dealing with, just maintaining tenants and maintaining curb appeal and keeping things in a running order.
That's awesome. So we'll just jump into the topic of the day today right away, actually. So can you walk me through step-by-step process of acquiring a mobile home park? And again, I'm being selfish here because, as you know, I'm looking at acquiring mobile home parks right now.
Sure. So the restate your question for me one more time, Alpesh. I
Yeah,
lost my train of thought.
sure. Can you walk me through step-by-step process of acquiring a mobile home park for a newbie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing you got to know about these deals is don't just jump in. They are a bear. And, I would never just recommend saying, hey, the numbers look good, I'm just going to say I know how to do this. First thing you got to do, there's three things, okay? You have to have your understanding that it's not easy to finance this deal. So you're going to have some good cash on hand, typically 25 to 30% to put.
I'm finding that right now.
It's very hard to fund these. Okay, and if you're buying a deal under $1 million, it's extremely hard to fund the deal.
Right.
Debt gets a little bit easier once you get to the 2 million range.
Yes.
So once you figure out how you're going to fund the deal, okay, the next thing you got to really worry about is how are you going to manage this deal. And, from a management standpoint, it's more than just hiring Bob in number two to help you collect rents and show units. Because for all you know, Bob in number two is on crack and is going to steal your money. It happened to me. It happened to everybody.
Right. Yes.
So don't be a sucker for the cheaper management. Although at times it does work well, and I'm proof of it. That I've definitely had good cheap management at my parks before, but it's atypical. So once you figure out the management side of the business, who you're going to have as a manager, and you vetted them out to make sure they're going to be a good manager who's going to watch your money, who's going to watch your park, watch your income, help you keep these units rented, then you got to start looking for some maintenance guys. Unless if you're going to be crawling under the
Right.
trailers every day, which, hey, I did for 10 years. Eventually you get tired of seeing snakes and rats underneath trailers. In the South, they're all over the place, even
Yep.
nice.
Yep.
And so you have to get some maintenance guys. And right now in today's economy with 3.5% unemployment, it's actually pretty hard to find a good manager and to
Yes.
find a good maintenance crew. So if you're buying a value add deal and you have to renovate tons of stuff, think about that before you go and close that deal, because you might not have the labor force lined up to be able to do so. And third, most importantly, tied for most importantly, is go talk to your municipality first and foremost. Oftentimes, the local owner is either out of touch or unrealistic as to what the city will or won't allow. And for all you know, there might be some things coming down the pipeline that's going to jeopardize your future deal. Like maybe city sewer is coming, which could sound great, but it could also cost you a fortune to connect to.
Right.
And they don't give you a lot of leeway if it's time to connect. Maybe there's something in the zoning requirements that that are coming, that if you replace an older home with a new home, it triggers all the setbacks at the park, and you might have to swipe your park clean and start over. And that's a massive headache and fortune.
Right.
And all these little things that you don't think about because, hey, a deal's a deal and you're just trying to make some money. These are the kind of things that really end up coming back to me, and people with their hands up in the air saying, "Uh-oh, I don't know what to do. I've gotten in over my head. Help me figure out how to
Right.
to navigate this mess that I'm in." And so those three things, really, the municipality, the management, and the funding, don't even waste your time looking at deals until you really have those three things figured out. Now, if you know where you want to be, that helps you narrow into understanding the municipalities. Your lender is going to require tons of paperwork from you,
Yes.
from the park, and all that kind of stuff. So get some of that figured out up front, what you're going to need. So make sure when you're talking with your seller, he has those things. And then, of course, the management side. There's a lot of crooks that are happy to take your money and put on a
Yes.
smile.
It's
So,
everywhere.
don't shy away from paying somebody who's licensed, like a realtor or a property manager, 10% income to help you keep this going. Now that tops out around $40,000. So if you have a big park, that's about where the maximum management fee should be around. Maintenance guys, $20,000 to $30,000 depending on where you live. It's probably number two. So you got to budget accordingly for these things, and then start looking at deals. Because if you came to me with the deal, said, "Hey, I'm going to buy this thing," and I ask you those same three questions, guess who's not going to pass my vetting test? And I'm going to have to tell the seller that he doesn't have all of his ducks in a row, really, to make a reasonable offer that we can have faith in.
I see. So let's say if I'm starting out and I'm looking to acquire a park, right? But the problem is, and most of my listeners are out of state, right? Would be out of state buyers. Do you recommend someone who is an out of state investors to start with a mobile home park somewhere far away?
The answer is it depends. Okay.
Right.
So, where I lived, the nearest grocery store is 25 miles away. Okay. So, going to an airport was, I probably could have made better money going further away than staying local in my case. Okay. But for most people who live in a reasonable metro, and if you drew a 2-hour ring around your metro, there's probably a deal good enough for you to do your first deal on there. And you can save a lot of, gas and flight fees and hotel fees by staying a bit closer to home. Because once you go under contract, you're going to want to spend a lot of time at that park. You're going to want to see that park at different times of the day. Nighttime, you want to see what the nighttime activity is. You want to see, what the afternoon looks like. Are all the cars there, or is everybody out at work?
Right. That's
You want to
important.
kind of figure these things out. And you're going to want to spend some time with the locals out there, kind of understanding the train of thought about, whatever the local politics are, whatever the rumor mill is giving about what's happening with the economy out there. You're going to want to ask them, "Hey, what do you know about this mobile home community? Has there been anything, bad happen there?" And
Right.
locals will give you some good feedback. And we're all a little shy of talking to strangers nowadays, but I can tell you, in most towns, I've had pretty good luck being able to strike up a conversation with just about anybody. And most people are typically pretty honest with telling you how they feel about something. So I look at all those kind of things. It's I wish I would have spent one full week at my park, sleeping at that park before I bought that park, because I can tell you there would have been no way in hell I would have bought that park. Because everybody looks pretty during the daytime,
Right,
the freaks come out at
right. The
night,
night
so
times, yeah. The cracks, the alcohol, everything comes
yeah.
out, right?
Yeah, and it's. I don't want to give this bad impression that all mobile home
Right,
communities have these problems, because a lot of them, nearly most of them, don't. I'm referring mainly to these subpar, value add, C
right.
minus type of places that are mismanaged in all of those, because that's the park most people are thinking about buying to turn around and make a
Correct.
buck.
Yeah, everyone wanna make more money by going for value
By
add,
dealing with
C
all that headache
class.
and all that
Yeah,
cleanup. And I really don't recommend buying that deal on your first deal. I really recommend any of your buyers buying a nice, stable,
stabilized.
easy
Yeah,
peasy, know you're not going to get rich type of
right.
deal. But spend $1 million on something small, get something that's stabilized with achievable upside, like maybe a nice 3 to 5, 10% rent growth in the first year or two or
Right,
something, where you can learn the game and
right,
understand the type of people
right.
you're working
Yeah,
with,
yeah.
and
Baby
then go buy something.
steps. Yeah, take baby steps.
Baby steps. You go to college before you get your doctorate degree. I mean, you date before you get married. All those
Correct,
kind of,
correct. Absolutely. You get to taste the water. So let's say someone is starting out and, they are reaching out to brokers, right? They're getting deals from all over the country. Should that person already identify the area they want to invest in, or start looking at every deal that comes to
Depends. I mean, if you live in Atlanta and you don't believe in the Atlanta economy, and you're like, hey, I want to buy in Miami or Dallas or Phoenix or something, it's an easy flight to get there. So
Right.
maybe you look at that market, right? But again, for your first time, I would really suggest staying as close to home as you can, and that way you'll be able to kind of manage the headaches of the travel a lot more.
Right. But someone
But
like
if
me
you
who is
go
in
out of
San
state,
Francisco Bay Area, it's hard to find anything.
it is. It's hard to find good stuff out there. If you go up the, Lake Tahoe, there's a few things up there.
Yeah.
If you head over to Reno, there's some good things
Reno's,
there.
yeah.
Reno's a fabulous town.
Yeah, Reno's amazing.
I mean, you have options, but again, you're going to have to go somewhere. So since you have to drive for 2 hours, you might as well get in a plane and maybe go,
Correct.
somewhere within a 2-hour flight of you and a 1-hour drive after there, because
I see.
Phoenix is a great market where there's tons of affordable deals, but they're still pricey for the most part, but
Yes,
it's a
yeah,
great
that's the
market.
problem. The real estate is so expensive in the west part of the country, and even including
It
Phoenix and
is,
all.
it is, but it's really not that much more. It's like, in Arizona, the cap rates in Phoenix and the better parts of the metro, tend to be, 6%, sometimes even
Okay.
sub 6%, right? But, you look at the operating costs and you say, hey, but this makes sense. It's at 6% for a guaranteed, tenant base here, that you're going to have good, good population growth, good economic growth, and you're going to be
Right.
able to raise rents over time. So, even $50,000-$60,000 an occupied pad, who cares? Because it's probably in some amount of time, with enough rent increases and enough economy, in a growth mode, you're going to take that thing up to $75,000 to $100,000 a pad by
I
the time
see.
you're done with it. So that part doesn't scare me, as far as overpaying a little bit in some markets like that. And the thing I like the most about the Southwest, which most of California has the same, problem. I don't know if it's a problem or if it's a good thing, but it just never rains.
Right.
And so these homes, these park-owned
The
homes, these
weather is
tenant-owned
nice.
homes,
Yeah.
they last a lot longer out.
Yes.
And you
Yeah.
don't have to
Not
do a
like
lot of landscape.
Northeast. Yeah,
Yeah.
Northeast.
The Northeast, you got snow loads, you got,
Exactly.
rain almost every
Rain.
day, you
Yeah.
got grass growing up, through the roof, and, higher operating cost and a lower
Yes.
shelf life.
That makes sense. So I have another question now. You did mention about city sewer. So what's the difference between having public utilities versus private?
It's very simple. So public utilities means a municipal, a municipality like a city, county, whatever, is a township, providing public water that's already been treated and, brought in from wherever it is and then distributed like you get out of your tap. That would be a public
I
system. A
see.
private system is like what I grew up, what I have at my farm, and what a lot of people have in the South and in other places where getting some of the infrastructure in place is harder. We use a well system.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, a well would be a private system. Some places use wells and water treatment plants,
Right.
and it sounds scary and complicated, but they're actually pretty awesome and pretty low cost and efficient to run.
Oh, really? Okay.
You just have some high testing standards and things like
Yeah,
that.
because do you have to get it tested every month for some
Well, like
parts?
in
And
Pennsylvania, you have to test the water every day.
oh, okay.
So it's kind of a real pain in the butt, but it's part of the equation and the math when putting the deal together. In other places, like in Georgia and North Carolina, if you have less than 30 units, you never have to test the water.
Right.
That's a little scary to me. It's you hear these terrible things like what happens up in like Flint, Michigan, and if you're
Right.
not
Oh, yeah.
you can really hurt your tenants if you're not on top of your water quality. So most people
Correct.
prefer to have the public system, public water, especially on the first few parks, because it
Right.
limits a lot of the liability. But you
Correct.
will pay a slightly higher operating cost because
Yes.
of it. And if you're passing that charge for that water onto your tenant, like through a bill back sub-meter
Right.
type of system, you're also affecting the amount of lot rent that you're going to be able to increase on them as well, because they're paying two separate charges. Whereas if it's included in the rent, it makes your rent more competitive. And if it's on a well system, you're not paying for it, so you're able to keep your rents even at what other places that are charging for water are
I
at.
see.
So you're able to compensate a good bit there. But there is no better or worse system.
Okay.
The guru types out there are going to tell you to buy public water direct
Yeah,
fill.
I'm always looking for water and sewer, not well and
Yeah, I
septic.
mean septic is when you jump over to the sewer side of the equation, private, public, it means the same thing as with the water. It's from a municipality. It's all the
Right.
waste effluent is taken away and goes somewhere we
Right.
never have to think about it. But with the septic, it's a private system, and it's what most people in rural areas have, and it's a tank under the ground that has some leach fields attached by piping and gravel, and it dissipates through there. Again, very low cost way to remove the wastewater, and they have very long shelf lives, and if they are kept in good operating standards, they'll last forever. But people have this bad idea that a septic is going to cost them a lot of money if it breaks down, and it just doesn't. They're about $3,500 in most places, three
I
thousand
see.
dollars to have it if you had a total failure to bring it back online. Whereas
Oh,
if you
okay.
were on a public source system and the tiles were under your maybe under your roads, or the pipes were under your roads and deep, and you were responsible for the maintenance on.
Right. Yep.
Now you're having to dig up your roads. Now you're having to dig up the pipe. You're going through so much money. It's ridiculous at that
Oh, I see.
point. So you have a higher potential cost at times when using private water or
Oh,
private.
okay. Okay. Makes sense. So what can go wrong for a newbie during due diligence?
Everything. So literally today I got off the phone with the guy, and he was, a little reluctant to tell me about his problem. He'd come to me about 2 months ago looking for a deal, and I wanted to sell him a park, and we couldn't find the right one, and so I introduced him to somebody that was selling self-storage, and he bought a self-storage building, right, or went under
Oh, okay.
self-storage. He's never owned self-storage, he's a
Right.
newbie, right? Smart guy, owns real estate, but nonetheless, he's a newbie for that category.
Correct.
Well, today on our phone call, I called just to check on him and see how his deal was going. He's like, I let my money go hard 2 weeks ago, and I've uncovered more things since then. And now I either have to retrade the deal for a couple $100,000, or I got to blow out of the deal and walk away from $25,000. And that's a painful decision that a new person first entering has to, deal with. It's unfortunate because the people that I turned them over to, they're self-storage guys, and maybe they don't know their product as well as I know my product, but they didn't apparently point everything out for him. And he's a little a little uncomfortable with the fact that he's going to lose money or recreate. Well, that same thing happens in ours. For him, it was the municipality issue, it was the deferred maintenance issue, and a few other things. And so those same issues are every category of real estate.
Right.
And when you start looking at a deal and you're not knowing what to ask, stop what you're doing and go find somebody who knows what to ask.
Right.
We got the internet nowadays. There's a
Oh
bazillion
yeah.
ways to find good
It's so easy.
technical questions. Ask these things. And my book, I give out a short list of due diligence questions to be kind of thinking to yourself and asking about. And most brokers have a similar list. I would recommend getting a list like that, so you at least have some of the big basic ones covered, and then rely on your brain capital, your accountant, your attorneys, your advisors,
Yes.
your investors, and come up with a plan about. We have to make sure we check everything off so no red flags come back to bite us later and cost us $25,000 in escrow money. And that's a painful experience. Your investors might not want to do a deal with you again if you cost them $25,000 before even getting to the closing table.
Right. So, hey, you just mentioned about your book, and I have your book. I'm reading it. It's amazing. Can you tell us more about your book?
Sure. So it's based on about 20 years of me being in the industry and brokering hundreds of deals. My experience as an owner, and my experience helping hundreds of other owners selling and buying parks, and some of the crazy stories that happen where it's just so, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is what we're in. And to some of the stories where I've helped many young local guys take their first investment of $500,000 and eventually help them sell it for $5 million. And those guys really like me, so I'm happy to do business with people like that, because it's a real neat experience. And the book talks about the differences between the guys that were like totally over their skis, and then the guys who ended up becoming millionaires. That's and great. A bunch of the other guys in the book that did just some wrong things and cost them a real good deal that they could have had, and different ways to negotiate with the sellers and the brokers. And really ways to understand all of the exposure that most first-time buyers are coming into, because everybody tells everything in this business, our business is easy, and it's not. It's insanely hard, and it is not a get-rich-quick place. It's more likely most people, at least 10 years ago, were not getting rich quick, and the people buying these under 50-unit deals, under $1 million deals, and just making crazy deals that couldn't make sense to anybody but the person who wrote them. And I want to help people avoid that, because I sold so many parks for guys 3 years later who lost money on their investments because they went and made some cockamamie deal and didn't have any good resources. So I wrote the book I wish I had when I bought my first park. And, filled it with a bunch of deal stories and how-tos and a bunch of my little Glenisms and things like that.
And I highly recommend the book. Thank you so much. So let's take a quick break, and after the break, we can discuss about some of the examples of newbie investors losing money or losing their shirts. So let's take a quick break. Welcome back to Wealth Matters Podcast, and I'm chatting with Glenn Estuson regarding how a newbie can acquire a mobile home park. We discussed about his book, The Mobile Home Park Manifesto, which I highly recommend. And I want him to share a couple of examples of nightmares he has seen with newbie investors after acquiring a mobile home park.
Yeah, there's a dime a dozen. So many of those stories that makes you really question, what were you thinking when you got into this deal? And some of the deals, I was intimately involved with a lot of these things, and some of them haven't turned out so well for those guys. Some of them turned out okay, but they all make you scratch your head and say, I don't want to do that again. So most recently, not most recently, but pretty recently, there was a deal I was working for, a very sophisticated apartment guy in the Southeast. And he said, hey, Glenn, I'm ready to sell this park. I bought it. I don't know what I'm doing with it. He owned thousands and thousands of Class A apartment buildings, and somehow managed to get this D- mobile home park, and it was literally filled with gangsters and prostitutes. And, and all of that kind of, kind of stuff. And it was an otherwise good location, but fully mismanaged.
I
And
see.
he overpaid for it. He had held on to it now 7 years. The market had barely caught up to where he was on it. It was just ready to let it go. Uh, on that particular deal, we were able to get him out, and not lose any money. And so this was a success
That's
story.
at
But it
least
took some
better.
major risk on his end to get him out. It was a deal I ended up actually having to take to auction. And
Oh, okay.
auction is a scary thing for a seller because it means
Right.
I'm telling you that this thing is not sellable otherwise.
Right.
And the price that he had paid for it, the reserve level was about half of that. So he could have lost half of, it was $1 million deal. He could have lost, $500,000 if
I
the
see.
bids didn't go where we wanted them to go. But luckily, we were able to get him up to just above, what he paid for it plus my fee, and he walked away feeling pretty happy at the end of the day. And the new buyer who got it is actually doing a great job with the turnaround. It was strictly a
Oh,
management,
okay.
in my opinion, and which made me feel comfortable allowing me to expose my buyers out to it because
Right.
it felt like there's definitely some upside here for somebody to achieve. And now that guy's doing great with that deal. The So that's a story with a newbie gets into the industry, even though they think they're so smart, and they
Right.
almost lost. They almost lost a lot. Luckily, we got
Right.
it, right. But so there's another story happened a few months or a year around that same time. And a very sophisticated, different apartment guy from the southeast, owning 20,000 units or something like that,
Oh,
and
wow.
decided to go into a big way into the mobile home world. And thought he knew everything, was a hot shot type of guy. We sold him, I think it was 5 or 6 parks, and we did a great job marketing him, a great job getting offers in. And this guy insisted that he wanted to win these deals, so he was willing to overpay by about $500,000. And
Ooh.
it's about a $5 or $6 million deal in that range.
Right.
Um, and I kept telling him, this is a bad idea for you, man. This is not the right deal for you. You should not be doing this. But you're older, bigger, smarter, and richer than I am. So you're a big boy. You do what you got to do. And after it's telling him numerous times not to buy this thing, well, he ended up closing it. Okay, and
Oh, okay.
uh, not even a year later, he calls back and he's like, "I need help, and I don't know what to do, and I need to get rid of these things. Can you get me out of them?" I said, let's see what we can do. Um, I sold him a 98% occupied community. Okay. When I took it back to evaluate it, he was at 65%.
Oh, wow.
And he said, "Oh, they weren't payers." I said, "Man, you have to know this business. It's like they're payers, but it might, some of these guys might take 60 days to pay, 90 days to
Right.
pay. And if you're not going to run, the way that this previous guy did, you're going to have to go through a painful year or two of
Right.
restabilizing the
Right.
park."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so now he's trying to get out. He was all into all the deals plus the capex he had put in, $9 or $10 million now.
Oh, wow.
Um,
That's
and
huge.
there's just no way to get him out. I mean, he's still $1 million or $2 million below what he bought it for.
I
And the
see.
parks are in much nicer condition because all the capex he put in was under the ground, fixing this and fixing that. So
Right.
cool.
So, yeah, you
So
can't see that.
can't really see it. It doesn't really pay off.
Right.
He should have listened and said, "Let somebody else buy that deal." Uh, it's unfortunate. And then you
I
get
see.
these horror stories of like your average guy, and this was a guy from the West Coast who was real affable, and he was a bit arrogant, but a nice guy otherwise, and he loved to play with OPM. And OPM, if you
Yeah.
don't know what that means,
Other
is
people's money.
money. That's a dangerous drug. That's a dangerous drug. And if people are trusting you, and they're trusting you with their
Right.
retirement savings and all that kind of stuff. Well, he went out on a buying spree in the early part of the decade, after the recession was more or less over, and he picked up 13 or
So that
14
was a good
parks.
time.
It was a
Yeah.
good time, right?
Yeah.
Everything made sense. So I'm
Right.
stealing this stuff. Um, well, not really.
But you
Like
got
just
to
because
manage.
you still have to operate
Yeah.
things.
So you got to operate.
And so he bought 13 parks in about 2 years,
Oh,
and they were all steep value adds. He had no stabilized assets in there. He
right.
insisted he could get all these things done and was going to do all this massive stuff. He lived in the West Coast. This was in the Southeast, and how often was he at the park? Maybe once a year or something. So
Uh,
by the time he got back to me, and he's like, "Help me, get me out of some of these things. I'm over my head." I said, "No problem." We sold off about 300 units very quickly to in some of his softer markets, and got those off of the table. Right. he barely was able to pay his investors back on that, barely. But he managed to save face and get there. But then he had these other deals that were even worse off, and they started sliding further downhill. Glenn, get me out of these things. I tried and I tried hard, and I got him through about half of his parks before foreclosure set in on the other ones. The last park I sold, he lost almost everything on the deal. It was an 80-something space park.
Oh, wow.
It had maybe 14 tenants left in it, and I could barely get him $500,000 for that park.
I see.
And
That's crazy.
And he was getting sued by his investors, the SEC.
Oh, that's terrible.
He had another park that was, so bad that the city shut it down. And so now this guy is now having a real hard time and lost millions of dollars. And it wasn't his money, so he's
never lose other people's money. Come on.
Never lose other people's money.
You can lose your own, but never.
And it's the average guy who's just using his own personal money and buys his first park.
Right.
And he's trying to learn the business, like what I was, That's the guy I really like to watch out for. And I tell so many people so often, don't buy that park. And it's not me trying to get in your way of making a deal. I'm trying to save you the headache where you work 10 years just to get out alive and barely make your money.
Right.
That's no fun. It ruins your good time, man.
Exactly. Exactly.
Everything's stressful, and it's a very slippery slope.
Yeah. Those are some
things, I highly recommend it. So those are some of the some of the obvious stories of where people thought they were smart, lost a bunch of money, or haven't lost their money yet, but they're about to in for some digging for a while. And then the one guy who lost a lot. And I got 1,000 other stories like that.
You do. You do. Thank you for sharing those stories. So the last question, or the second last question, any favorite business or real estate book?
Favorite real estate book?
Or business book?
Or business book. So there's, the oldies but goodies, of course, everybody's, Rich Dad, Poor Dad stuff.
Yeah,
that was my first.
Can't go wrong. That's my first book as well.
But I'm a big fan. My favorite all-around philosophy business book, and it's the tiniest little book you've ever seen. It's called The Greatest Salesman in the World.
Okay. I haven't read that one.
And it's fabulous. It's
okay.
It's principles, and it's not practical business advice. It's just principles.
Okay. I got to read that one.
A lot of my empathetic capitalism stuff comes from sort of that philosophy.
Yeah, and I like that word, by the way, empathic capitalism.
It's a hard word to pronounce, and I mess it up all the time.
Yeah. But I'm pretty similar in that case.
But my newest favorite book has been Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference.
You can't go wrong. I love that book.
That book is great. That book is great. I read about a book every week or two. I'm on a plane every week.
Yeah, so I try to read book every day, like 10, 15 pages a day.
I'm reading this one right now, which is fantastic.
No, I haven't read that one. I just finished The Miracle Morning again a couple of times and just read The Miracle Equation, love Hal Elrod's books as well. But
awesome.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to look at The Greatest Salesman in the World book for sure.
Yeah, it's great. It's a really tiny book, and you're meant to read it very slowly until you've memorized each section like it's the back of your hand. It takes about a year to read the book if you follow the instructions in the book.
Wow.
But it's only like 60 pages or 70 pages,
That's awesome.
But it's a really neat book to think on,
That's perfect. So how can my listeners reach out to you?
Well, there's many ways, so you can find me on Amazon, where you can find my book. Just type in my name, Glenn Esterson, or type in the Mobile Home Park Manifesto. You can go onto my website, which is the MHPexpert.com, and you can get access to all my blogs and things like that. And I'm on iTunes and things like that with my podcast as well, which is the Mobile Home Park Expert Podcast. And of course, you can always just email me through my website, or you can give me a call. My phone number's on there as well. Always happy to talk to new guys. Love helping new guys out in this business. And maybe I will strike a deal. Who knows? If nothing else, I'm sure I won't annoy you guys.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for your time today, Glenn.
Absolutely. It's been good,
Yeah.
Albert. Thank you for
Have a
having
great
me.
rest of the day.
Yes, sir.